welcome back to Ghouls Night In, the spooky chat show with your best ghoul friends. I'm Penny Snark.
And I'm Midge Munster. Now, Penny, would you say that you're superstitious or just a little stitious?
I would say I'm minimally stitious.
I kind of figured. I would say I'm pretty stitious. And we have a very special day coming our way right at the top of 2023 because January has a Friday the 13th this year.
Ooh.
So, actually, I guess I kind of knew this, but I never thought about it. Every year has at least one Friday the 13th in it.
Oh,
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
the more you know.
We're already learning. Oh man, we're
All
not
right
even a
out the
minute
gate.
in.
So yeah, every year we'll have at least one. Any month that begins with a Sunday will have a Friday the 13th.
Oh,
We
I
are
guess that is
getting
how math works.
that's exact. I literally had that moment where I read that and I was like, "Wow!" And I was like, "Oh yeah,
Oh.
weeks have 14 days, so I guess that makes sense." Or
Weeks don't
weeks
have 14.
2 weeks is 14 days. Is what I meant. Sorry, no one look at me. I'm not here. um, but we're getting two Friday the 13th in 2023 this year, and I'm excited to report that the second one takes place in October.
Oh, the best
So
time.
it'll be extra spooky ooky. But in today's episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about where the superstition of Friday the 13th being an unlucky day comes from. And that way, when you should be listening to this on Monday here, and when we get to Friday, you'll have all the knowledge you need to survive Friday the 13th.
Well, our show does come out on Tuesday, but
Here's the thing. What you need to know about me is that I'm an idiot. Weeks have 14 days. I don't know when my show comes out.
It's we are recording this in the week between Christmas and New Year's, which is a liminal space at best.
Yeah.
All you can hope to do is just nap and eat cheese and just wait for something to come to you.
Yeah, Ghouls Night In is currently like, whose line is it anyway? Because everything's made up and the dates don't matter.
Yes.
So forgive me. But anyway, let's talk about Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
So I want to start because this all stems back pre Friday the 13th as even a concept. The fear of the number 13 is where we're going to start, which is, get ready for it, called triskaidekaphobia. And this goes way, 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 way back. So the kind of traditional Western superstition is believed to have started with the Last Supper, when Judas Iscariot obviously was the 13th diner at the table of the Last Supper that came to betray Jesus. And then he was crucified, obviously, the next day on the Friday. But what I didn't know until researching for this episode is that there is actually a story in Norse mythology that is basically this same story. And of course would predate, Christian.
Yes.
There is a story in Norse mythology that the 12 gods were dining in Valhalla, and our good old boy Loki, the trickster god, was not invited to the party. And so of course he came anyway and arranged to have one of the other gods shot with a mistletoe tipped arrow, a poison arrow. And which honestly to me, Loki, that seems pretty petty for not being invited to a dinner party.
Right. Very Sleeping Beauty.
He said, well, this did not go the way I wanted. I'm going to kill someone. But that was really interesting to me because it is kind of the the Last Supper. So I'm like,
it is, yeah.
Did Christianity steal Norse mythology? That wouldn't be the first time they stole something.
Yeah, I say most likely.
But then in Western cultures, historically, 12 as a number has been associated with completeness, being kind of the perfect number. So, like 12 days of Christmas, 12 months of the year, therefore 12 zodiac signs, all these things. And so, therefore, the idea kind of became that the following number was decidedly imperfect. So 13 was no good because it came after 12.
Oh. It's funny that 13 is the bad one and not 11. Because
Right.
I
Because,
feel
like,
like
it's not quite
I would be
complete.
right. I would be like, oh, you're just shy of perfection, and that's even worse. But maybe that's maybe that says more about
I was
me.
going to say, we're learning something about Penny right now. That seems like
Oh.
maybe something to unpack in therapy next week.
Mhm.
But as far as Friday the 13th goes, now Friday was also kind of um, assumed to be an unlucky day. Again, a lot of this rooted in Christianity with the crucifixion of Jesus being on a Friday. Cain killed Abel on a Friday. Supposedly, the whole
Did they
Garden of
even have Fridays?
well, it is noted that right before he hit Abel with the rock, he said TGIF.
Right. I was just like, well, you guys, like, pre-industrialization, you didn't even know that Friday was the best day.
Right. Yeah, things that capitalism taught us. So they had already kind of, well, and apparently, so this is based on, I believe I read on the, like, the Jewish calendar, basically, to
Okay.
predate. So supposedly also the whole, like, Garden of Eden thing happened on a Friday when Eve took the apple. So who knows? Yeah, I don't know. Friday seems like a concept, but anyway, it was kind of already had this negative
Mhm.
connotation in a lot of ways, which, yeah, is funny now because now everybody's like, woohoo, Friday. Um, but they didn't correlate until much later. The now here's a fun one. There is a word for fear of Friday the 13th, and
Ooh,
it's
even more specific.
gonna be rough. Are you ready? Parascaveta catriophobia.
Oh.
So if anyone here has the fear of long words, I'm so sorry.
Right.
um so the fear of Friday the 13th, one of the most popular theories of how these things kind of came to be known together as unlucky, which actually is very specifically not popularized by history, but by Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, uh, the most credible of sources,
Yes.
revolves around the fall of the Knights Templar.
Ooh.
So the Knights of Templar were formed around 1118, and they were a medieval, like, military order, basically, a religious military order that, from what I could understand, I read literally, Penny, 5 articles about this, and I still don't really understand what these knights were for.
I mean, I've
But
seen National Treasure, so I feel like I've got a good handle
a
on it.
good grasp.
Yeah.
But they were supposedly formed to protect people who were on religious pilgrimages to the Holy Land during, like, the Crusades.
Mhm.
Um, and but from what little understanding I gained reading all these articles is that it became a pretty large financial organization. Like, very little of the organization were actually the combat knights,
Mhm.
and there were lots of financial people and farmers and people involved in the groundwork of the organization. And so they kind of became this early banking system. Um, and lo and behold, as usually happens, the people in power didn't like that too much
Shocking.
because these people had all this money that wasn't the king's money. And he said,
Mm. Don't
now
like that.
now I don't like that at all. So basically, King Philip, he does a really fun thing where he releases these, like, secret documents, sent through couriers throughout France, that included details of these knights being using, like, black magic and having scandalous sexual rituals,
Ooh.
just basically completely, blaspheming their
Yes.
everything. And so their downfall and arrest begins on Friday, October 13th, 1307.
Ooh.
And so this is believed to be the first reason that people thought Friday the 13th was bad. So these
Would have
men,
been cooler if they waited 6 more years.
right? I had that thought too. I was like, ah, man.
Missed
Um,
opportunity, man.
yeah. Why, why couldn't you wait to torture these poor men? So yeah, they're King Philip the Fourth of France gets these men charged with like all these offenses: heresy, devil worship. One that was very specifically quoted was spitting on the cross, whatever that
Oh.
means. Uh, and of course, homosexuality, the ultimate crime.
Oh, yes.
Fraud and financial corruption were the charges brought on them. And the, like I said, the only real motive he had was that they owed him some money and he wanted to take them for everything they were worth. So the really horrible thing is that these men were arrested and then really horribly tortured,
Mm.
similar to what we saw like in the witch trials, like kept in little pits in the ground and feet dipped in oil and put over fires and racked and all these horrible things. um, and so many of them ended up confessing to these crimes even though they did not commit them,
Yeah.
to get out of the torture situation. And then, unfortunately, a large number of them, including the leader of the group, were burned at the stake. So, not the luckiest day in history.
No, no. Kind of a big bummer.
Yeah, big bummer. Um, so, like I said, the book Da Vinci Code, there's some themes about Knights Templar in there, and so this kind of was the cultural reason that this belief got popularized, that they were the reason for Friday 13th being unlucky. However, I read a Nat Geo article that
Ooh.
said, no, 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 that is not correct. And they were very adamant that that was not the reason Friday the 13th was unlucky. They didn't really offer a counter argument, but they were very adamant. They said that was the day they were arrested only, and nothing else bad happened that day. And I was like, well, they did rot in prison for 2 years, but pop off.
Yeah, and I mean, it like none of the other stuff would have happened if not for the arresting part.
Right,
So that was kind
right.
of like the instigating
It was kind of
moment.
the thing, right? But there is kind of another large thing, theory. The hottest take, you might say, is that it Friday and the 13th weren't associated as bad luck together until 1907. So much,
Whoa.
much, much, much later. There was a novel titled Friday the 13th, published in 1907, by Thomas William Lawson. And this was a story about a kind of a rogue, not unsavory, a rogue
Yeah.
stockbroker who puts into motion a bunch of events on Friday the 13th, kind of using the superstition to take down Wall Street. Um, so when this novel originally got published, it was like a huge success. It sold more than 60,000 copies in the first month. And due to its success, stockbrokers around the world allegedly refused to trade at all on Friday the 13th for some time afterward. So, but this is a fun little tidbit. I thought this was very interesting. So the author, Lawson himself, was also a businessman and stockbroker outside of being an author.
Hmm.
And he was kind of known for trying to sniff out unsavory stuff that was happening within the financial markets. But he also had like several large investments in weird things, including a ship that shared his name. It was the Thomas William Lawson.
Mm.
So this ship ends up wrecking in an uninhabited island called the Isle of Scilly, which is hilarious, by the way. It's silly spelled like Scilly because it's
Ah,
like outside of uh like uh Cornwall
yeah,
area. But yeah, the
that's
Isle
pretty
of
funny.
Scilly. So it crashes and wrecks in a storm on December 14th, 1907. I'm assuming because of the way the article talked about the publishing of his book, that the book came out, earlier in
Hmm.
1907, because it talked about like the first month sales and all that, and December 14th is like halfway through the year.
Yeah.
Anyway, or halfway through the last month of the year is what I'm saying. So December 14th, 1907, ship crashes, kills all but 2 of the 18 crew members, and the cargo was 58,000 barrels of paraffin oil.
Ooh.
So this caused what is possibly the first large marine oil spill in history.
Whoops.
So now you heard that date was December 14th
I did.
at 2:30 a.m. But that's England time. So for Lawson, who owned stock in that boat, who lived in Boston, the time the ship was destroyed was 8:30 p.m. on Friday, December 13th.
Dun, 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 dun.
So I thought that was an interesting thing because assumedly he'd written that book prior to this crash.
Yeah.
So I was like, you kind of manifested that there, bud. You made that an unlucky day for
You
yourself.
gotta watch out, man. I thought you were gonna say that he was secretly part of the Knights Templar.
That would have been cool. That would have
Maybe he was.
like 3,000 years later.
Well, like in like the National Treasure way, where it's like, P.S. We've secretly been here all along.
He has like a little like Freemason ring,
Exactly.
but it's
He
the
like
Knights
flashes
Templar,
his little ring, and you're like, oh,
little red cross, and everybody's like, oh. He could have been. I don't know. He's a wily fellow. He had a lot going on. So then, of course, the largest thing to really make, like, solidify this in our culture today is the release of the first Friday the 13th film in 1980. If you are not a big horror person, I think even people who are not horror people have a general concept of these films. But the franchise mainly focuses on Jason Voorhees, who was thought to have drowned as a little boy in Camp Crystal Lake, basically due to camp staff negligence, like not paying attention to him. And then it kind of becomes this, thing where decades later the lake is cursed and Jason comes back, and there's this series of mass murderers, not always at the camp for quite a while until Jason takes Manhattan.
As one does.
Now I could absolutely, and probably after Brian Fuller releases his series, I probably will do a full episode about this franchise. But what I really want to focus on here is that, interestingly, this is one of my favorite horror fun facts. I always put it in my trivia when I do horror trivia around KC. The original title of the Friday the 13th film was Long Night at Camp Blood. Y'all know I'm a sucker for like names that didn't make the cut, and I think this is one of the top ones because it's just stupid. Like it's such a dumb name for a movie.
It sounds like a Western. Like Showdown at the OK Corral. Long Night at Camp Blood.
Long night. Yeah, it definitely, it's that vibe. And to my knowledge, which I will say, and I've said this, I think, on the pod before, that Friday the 13th is my least favorite horror film franchise. I'm not a big Jason fan. I don't hate it, but it's definitely not my area of expertise where horror is concerned. But to my knowledge, the date Friday the 13th is never mentioned.
I was gonna say, I have not actually seen these, but I was like, does Jason die on Friday the 13th? Or like, how is this part of it?
Let's talk about it. So Pamela Voorhees, Jason's mama, in the first movie, makes a comment that it's Jason's birthday when he, quote, drowns. So, like, fans of the franchise always assumed that Jason's birthday was Friday the 13th and that the day he drowned was Friday the 13th, and that's why the curse is like that he comes back on Friday the 13th and takes his revenge, right? However, the franchise bit themselves in the butt so many times that it's so convoluted now. Nobody knows why this is called this. Because at a later time, it's mentioned that Jason's birthday is in July, and July in 1979, when the first film takes place, doesn't have a Friday the 13th. The 13th would have been on a Wednesday. And then, like, the year was born doesn't have a Friday the 13th. Like, overall, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And they keep, like, making allusions to dates really specifically throughout the franchise, but none of them line up with anything. And then, like, there's a point later where they show Pamela Voorhees, like, tombstone, and it says 1980 as her death date, which in the first movie, it would have been 1979. So then that changes the whole anyway.
Continuity, man.
But I will say, who's watching Friday the 13th for the plot? Anybody?
Yeah.
No takers? It doesn't make any sense, but nobody cares because you're really just there to watch Jason slash teenagers. But I do think it's interesting because it's like that film is such a staple in why people are like, ooh, Friday the 13th. And there seems to be legitimately no correlation to the date and the events of the films. So there's your horror fun fact of the day. This is not an unlucky day in all cultures. Like I said, this is a pretty Western thing.
Yeah.
In Greece and like Spanish speaking countries, Tuesday the 13th is considered the unluckiest day. And then in Italy, Friday the 17th is unlucky. I guess has to do with when, like, rearranging the Roman numeral for 17, you can create the word Vixi, like Vixi, which I guess translates to "my life is over" in Latin.
Oh. I was like, Vixi.
Yeah, so supposedly that's Friday the 17th is their unlucky day. Right. And then in other cultures, Friday the 13th or 13 is a lucky number. So I think this is pretty much like anything, right? It is what you make of it.
Yeah.
The history of it is very convoluted, and there seems to be no agreement as to why, for sure, Friday the 13th itself is unlucky. So what I say is, go about your day on Friday. Have a great day. Don't worry about it. One of my best friends got married on Friday the 13th, like 5 years ago, because she says it's always been a lucky day for her. So your luck is what you make it. If you take nothing else away from this episode. I also did read some like fun facts that there are some statistics that support like increased rates of transportation accidents and things like that on Friday the 13th historically. But then, of course, immediately after, there were other studies that were like, that's not true.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's ways to like manipulate that data just depending on how you collect it. But yeah, I just wanted to delve into this a little bit. I think it's interesting how superstitions form. And like I said, I actually am a pretty superstitious person, and I've always had that in the back of my head of like, oh, Friday the 13th, but I had no idea why. And I still don't.
Yeah, and now you know that no one knows. Just generally spooky, which is fine.
Yeah, exactly. But thank you all for entertaining this weird little dive into Friday the 13th. Like I said, I would love to also eventually do something about the franchise itself. So if that's something that interests you, let us know. Also, we would love, if you are so inclined, if you would leave a review wherever you're listening to this podcast, or a rating. Those really, really help us find new audience members and just know that we're putting out content that you're enjoying. And I believe we are currently fresh out of hot reviews.
Fresh out. Oh.
So go leave us a crazy one.
Yes.
Find a way to work the word platypus into it.
Ooh, I like it. I like the challenge. I will say that in this time where we would normally read a review, I'll remind you that you can shop for Ghouls Night In merch at midgemunster.com/shop, or follow the link in our show notes. Great way to spend if you got money for whatever holiday you were celebrating. Get yourself a t-shirt or a mug, a tote bag. I carry my embroidery stuff in my tote bag when I go to Stitch and Bitch night, and it's pretty great.
I saw we had a mug ship this morning.
Ooh.
So I believe the person's name was Jeffrey. If you're Jeffrey and you bought a mug, thank you.
Enjoy
I hope
it,
you enjoy
Jeffrey.
it. Watch, that's probably not their name, and I'm like utterly destroying that.
Or maybe now
No, it
maybe
is.
some
It's Jeffrey.
there you go. I was gonna say if your name is Jeffrey and you didn't buy a mug, you should.
All people named
All
Jeffrey
people named
are
Jeffrey.
now required to buy a mug.
Buy a
today
mug right
only.
now.
If you would like more stupidity from both of us, you can. If you would like to remind me how weeks work or what day the podcast comes out, you can leave comments over on our Instagram at Ghouls Night In Pod. And if you're looking for me, you can find me across all platforms at Midge Munster.
And you can find me at Penny Snark.
And until next time,
Goodbye.